thanks a lot for this opportunity to present some of the work that I've been doing and, to provide maybe some helpful tips that might help people with their wastewater treatment plants. And so I'm from Environmental Innovations Branch of the Ontario Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change, and we're a small branch, and then we work on pilot projects to test a new way of doing business. And so we're a little bit of a different branch than the typical regulatory functions of the branch. And today I'm going to be talking about a few things here. One is why optimize. I'm going to speak to an optimization gap that that we've recognized. I'm going to talk a little bit about a performance-based training pilot that we did, lessons learned from that, and do a little case study on this thing called Sludge Accountability, and talk a little bit about the future direction of where the work that my branch is doing is going. So the first thing, why optimize? So about a year ago, we asked several municipalities in Ontario, well, why optimize? And these municipalities are actively pursuing optimization or have a keen interest in the optimization. And, they gave us we greatly appreciate that they gave us the answers because, that's where the great information comes from. So this first bullet, I'll paraphrase it, but basically what it's saying, it's a general statement that says motivation for optimization is to efficiently meet regulatory regulations and guidelines to achieve good effluent in a sustainable way. And the other bullets here say how to do it, how that's done. And that's, well, plant capabilities are better known when you optimize and upgrades are properly planned. Unnecessary capital expenditures are avoided. Decision-making is based on data and process control is enhanced. And staff become more empowered. And one of the key things about optimization is taken up in this last point is when we start to see these beneficial outcomes, it pushes us to seek continuous improvement. That's something I'll touch upon a little bit later about the whole thing that, there's no magic bullet here, that this is a continuous improvement exercise. So this is, I'm going to get talking a little bit about the gap in a minute, but to set this up is that I want to talk a little bit about this figure, which is called a performance pyramid. And so what it is, it describes the various factors that go into producing good and economical effluent at a wastewater treatment plant. So at the bottom, you have three different categories in the light blue boxes, and that's administration, maintenance, and design. You combine those to get a capable plant. And then in order to get good economical effluent is that you have to combine that with good operations or process control to achieve your treatment goals. So you can classify these different factors into non-infrastructure and infrastructure factors. So obviously design is an infrastructure issue, and maintenance can kind of be something where it falls in between. But the rest of them are strongly in the non-infrastructure zone. This is the gap that I'm looking at. So I looked at some data from some performance limiting factors, some studies that were done in Ontario on wastewater treatment plants that looked at all the factors that are involved in performance of the treatment plant, and they found about half of them were related to non-infrastructure issues. And then fast forward 20 years is that some of the work that Mark's been doing in the Grand River Conservation Authority area is that they've also been doing some studies and looking at the performance limiting factors, and what they found is the same thing, is that 20 years later, still there's about half of them are non-infrastructure issues. And so that really nothing has much changed in 20 years if you look at this. And why hasn't that? Is that, well, I think that there's a low awareness on the impact of non-infrastructure factors on performance. And also is that when you look at funding programs, a lot of them focus on building infrastructure, and that's that design box in that performance pyramid that I showed. And so that's really an important thing to remember is that, is that the design box, there's always design things to fix, but there's also important to look at the non-infrastructure issues. So the Ministry of the Environment, we took on this performance-based training pilot test. And what performance-based training is that this is not our invention. It's a tool used by the United States Environmental Protection Agency in drinking and state drinking water regulators for their area-wide optimization programs. And it focuses on addressing non-infrastructure factors. And so the U.S. has an optimization program that's been in place for about 20 years on drinking water side. And so what performance-based training does, it attempts to distill the large amounts of information into a series of training modules. And the purpose of, and what it does is it addresses the knowing-doing gap. And it does that by having content-based learning in the classroom combined with in-plant assignments that directly apply the learning in the classroom. And that's all addressing this knowing-doing gap. And the name performance comes from the fact that this training is built around to try and achieve certain performance goals at the treatment plant, and so that provides direction to the training. And an important thing with this is that this is something that's done where there isn't a left on their own to do this, is that each participating plant is matched with a facilitator. So our pilot test is that we're adapting this drinking water tool to wastewater. We had 7 modules from October to February in 2017, and we covered things such as performance and plant loading, capacity of processes, data verification, sludge processes, and process monitoring and control. And so what does a module look like? So there's the in-class learning, there's a report back on in-plant assignments, some lecture, some calculator exercises, and other activities. And the in-plant assignment and these tasks are directly related to the in-class content. So it's implementation training, basically. There's some data collection and analysis, and there's that work with the facilitator. And so really we tried to do this to address, we're trying to address the non-infrastructure factors. And so what this slide shows is that the figure showed that it did have an impact on some of those non-infrastructure factors, such as improved operating procedures, more familiarity of plant needs, better data, stronger working relationships, it's things like that. So we measured this after each module to see if we were having an impact. And so there's some lessons that we learned from this training that I think are universally applicable, and I'm just going to share a few here. One of those is that applying theory at plants using in-plant assignments worked well. I think that's applicable to anything, is that many of us have gone to training and then come back and it's like, well, how do I actually apply this in my, at my facility or in my workplace? In the content side is that one of the things that we needed to focus on was to make it meaningful managers, because the managers are the ones that can support this. Whether that's through providing adequate staffing or providing the resources or time for staff to do the work. And the benefits of participation is that the way we organized this, we had 5 treatment plants participating together, and they found that really valuable for a networking perspective, and then to learn how other people did stuff. And so having that mix of people was great in one room. And so feedback, it was good feedback. The one that I'll highlight here is that the last one is that, someone said is that we feel like we're looking at everything, questioning it, seeing if there are better ways or time and dollar savings. And so the take-home message here is that the feedback was really positive, and we brought people through these different processes on calculating things and looking at things a little bit differently, and there was a real benefit to this. But is it a magic bullet? Well, probably if I'm asking that question, you're going to think that, yeah, well, no. I don't think there are really any magic bullets in this industry, because really performance-based training only sets up a plant for success. Is that if you're going to be optimizing successfully, it requires persistent application of best practices over the long term. Or in other words, it's a quality management exercise. So the plan, do, check, and improve process. So next, I'm going to talk some on a case study on sludge accountability. So this is one of the things that we did in our training, and I'm just wondering, Alex, we were going to have a poll on whether people have ever heard of sludge accountability before. I'll explain it later. Ah, there it is. So I guess I will go on as we do this. So what sludge accountability is it's a comparison of the measured amount of sludge leaving a wastewater treatment plant with the theoretical amount of sludge that should have left the treatment plant. And the idea is that the measured amount of sludge should be about equal to the theoretical amount of sludge. And another thing to consider with sludge accountability is that it should cover an extended period of time, which is several months to a year. So why would we want to calculate sludge accountability? Well, that's a good question. And what I believe, it's an essential step in the optimization of wastewater treatment plant capacity and performance because it allows for verification of analytical results and flow data and identify gaps related to recycle and waste streams. And when you compare the measured amount of sludge produced and the theoretical amount of sludge should be produced by a plant based on what's coming into the plant, the discrepancy should only be about 15%. And when it is within that 15%, we say that the sludge accountability closes. And some sources of discrepancies can include non-representative samples, inaccurate flow measurement, missing data on return streams, high-strength wastewater for industrial sources, solids recirculation within the plant, and of course, the judgment or assumptions used in the calculations, and there can be other reasons too. So what we found with our pilot test, and when we had some people go through this process, is we found that the sludge accountability didn't always close. And so at the top here, I have the equation for sludge accountability, which is that measured sludge production divided by theoretical sludge production times 100%. And on this figure here, I have on the vertical axis the results of sludge accountability. And then on the bottom, it's the different treatment plants. And the red lines are the 85% and 115%. And the stars, or the asterisks, on top of the bars is where there were significant data gaps or assumptions were made to do the calculation. So you can see that sludge accountability doesn't always close, and often there's missing information. That's a take-home message you can get from here. But then that shouldn't be discouraging to say, it's like, well, it's not useful to do because it never works, but it's a process that you go through, and it identifies where better data needs to be collected to better understand the process. So, okay, so say your sludge accountability doesn't close or there's missing information. Is it something we just did it because it was a fun exercise, or do we go into looking into it a little bit more? So why care? So sludge accountability informs solids inventory control because sludge accountability provides information on where solids come from and where they go. And good solids inventory control is essential for effective wastewater treatment. And the benefits of inventory control can allow for additional capacity, allow for nitrification to be achieved, reduced energy, reduce biosolids management costs, improve the characteristics of the biomass, improve the ease and stability of operations, improve effluent quality. And the take-home message here is knowledge of where solids come from and where they go, meaning sludge accountability closes, enables solids inventory control, and in turn those benefits above. So it's a step in the optimization pathway. And before I go on, I just want to take a quick mention of climate change on why we want to be looking at optimization now, particularly because we know or we can expect drought conditions, extreme temperatures, and extreme rainfall. And all of those, if there's a plant that is well optimized, it is going to be able to be resilient to those changes and also be able to adapt to them. The future direction of this is that we did the pilot test, and right now we're looking into creating a small-scale optimization program based on that US EPA program. I mentioned, and that's for drinking water, and so we want to try and adapt it to wastewater in Ontario. And where we want to be is this figure shows from Washington State a drinking water example. There's two things shown on this graph. One of them is the blue line, which is performance of the drinking water treatment plants, and that's effluent turbidity from the filters. The lower the number, the better the public health protection. And the bars are the non-compliance, and so shorter bars, better compliance. And so there's a win-win situation in my mind where there's better public health protection when there's optimization and there's better compliance. And so that's where we're trying to get to. And so just a little note on collaboration. We've had a lot of help from municipalities. The US EPA has been helping with us, of course, the pilot test participants and GRCA. And that's it. That's my presentation. So if you have questions that you don't have answered, you feel free to call me or send me an email, and I can help you out. And that's it for me. And I see that not many people knew what sludge accountability is, and that's been my experience. But that's fine.
No, it's fine. It sounds like a new way of doing that. And let me just clarify a few things here, if I can. Get to the right slide right there. Just quick, in terms of clarification, is sludge accountability just one of several tests that you could run?
It is. It is. It's. I really like to think of sludge accountability as a process, and I mentioned this a little bit in my presentation, but it's taking certain steps, looking at data in a certain way to identify where there are different gaps in it. So there are other ways of doing it. Is that a more commonly known term might be a solid mass balance. So that's looking at, okay, well, what are do the solids coming into a treatment process equal the solids coming out of the process? And so sludge accountability does a little bit of that, but it also does a little bit of different things too. So I guess to answer your question, probably the closest related thing to it would be mass balances.
Okay.
For that.
So there are other tests that you could be doing, but this one is a good indicator of overall performance, as you were saying.
Yeah.
I'm curious about the cost of doing this exercise and how long it takes.
Well, the way we set it up as a performance-based training module, which was a one-day classroom session where all of the theory was gone over, and then there was a follow-up session to that where everybody who participated was able to present their results. And so I think the biggest thing the hardest thing that people have found to do is assembling the data in one spot. Because what I find is often data is located in different spots that's needed for the calculation, and it could take some time to get the right data from the right people. So, time-wise, if you have all the data ready, is that you probably can get it done in about a couple of hours. But then oftentimes there are questions that come up, and you have to look for more data. So it can take probably a couple of days on the order of that. It's not super straightforward, but okay. It's a good process.
But this is using information that's readily available in most systems. You're not having to create a whole other system or database per se. It's using existing.
That's right.
Content. Okay, very good.
Yeah. We always emphasize using data that's already existing, and then the follow-up to doing it is to collect that data to try and improve the calculation on sludge accountability.
Okay. Just while I'm here, I'm wondering if anybody else has questions or clarification for Aaron that you could just type into the chat box, and then we'll be able to repeat them. Give a few minutes or seconds here for people to ask what they'd like. Oh, here's one already. Where does one get the theoretical amount of sludge? A question from Kendall. That's a good point. What is, in theory, is the right amount of sludge? How do you know that?
Okay. So the theoretical amounts of sludge come from what is coming into the plant, so the volume and strength of the wastewater, and also the type of treatment process. And so this is something that's done for a mechanical treatment plant, so a conventional activated sludge plant, for example, or an extended aeration plant. And there are certain sludge production ratios that come into effect. So you would multiply by, so say for example, the amount of BOD removed in the secondary system, and if that, you multiply that amount of BOD removed, you multiply it by the sludge production rate, and it gives you the amount of sludge that should be produced. And so there are some standard numbers that are used, and also looks at, and you use the data from your plant to calculate the theoretical amount of sludge. And also for chemical too, it's the same thing, is that you add a certain amount of chemical to remove phosphorus, and you multiply that amount of chemical that you add by the sludge production ratio for that particular chemical, and then you come up with a sludge production number for that. So that's how that's done.
Okay, thank you. Another question from Heather. She says, can the sludge accountability results be tied to biosolids quality?
Be tied to biosolids quality.
Quality.
So, trying to think of how to answer this one. So it's not really tied to biosolids quality. It depends though, because there are different ways of doing the sludge accountability. Is you can do it before the sludge is digested, or you can do it after the sludge is digested. So it can be tied to biosolids quality, which is the digestion process. So so the sludge is produced by the treatment plant in the liquid train, and then it gets transferred to the solids treatment train, so an anaerobic digester or an aerobic digester. And if that digester is performing really poorly, for example, and there's not much solids destruction in the digester, is that actually will, your sludge accountability probably won't close then. And then you'll wonder why it doesn't close, and then it'll force you to look at a little bit of the digester performance to see, and look a little bit more in depth on the digester to see how it's performing, to see what those numbers look like. So I think that maybe answers that question. And then I actually had a question here too that was sent. It says from Bruce, would sludge accountability work for lagoons too? Really good question, and I actually have an answer for that one. Based on some of the work that was done by Mark and the Grand River Conservation Authority, is that I said that sludge accountability is used for mechanical treatment plants primarily, but the process has been, or the concept, I would say rather the concept has been adapted to lagoons, and what has been done is it looks at a water balance instead. So it's basically a mass balance on the water, because the amount of water going into the lagoon should be roughly equal to the amount of water going out of the lagoon, and you also have to take into account precipitation too. And so then some of the work that Mark's been doing on these water balances is that it's identified some areas where, okay, maybe we need to look a little bit better at the influent monitoring, is the flow monitoring, because a lot of the capacities of the lagoons are dependent on the volume of wastewater that they can actually hold. Okay. And there's another question here too.
Sorry. I'm sorry, I heard the mute there. Go ahead with your question, please.
Okay, I'll read it out. You want me to read it out, Dwayne?
Yes, please.
Okay, so this is, okay, now it's going up.
Sorry, can you go ahead.
The community Newtopia ERS ambassadors need to quantify the sludge at various communities in order to know how much we can pay municipalities for some of the sludge. Since we'll save them a lot of money, who can we contact to help the communities save on operating costs? And there's an addition here, since Newtopia ERS system saves more than anaerobic or aerobic digestion alternatives. Who can we contact through you? You can give me a contact. I'm not sure exactly, and you can provide me more information on what your idea is. And sure, just give me a call or an email sometime. And because I don't know if I understand fully what the question is.
Okay, well maybe it's one you can follow up, and Aaron's given his email, and then they'll be included in the slide deck as well. But wonderful. I have one more question for you, Aaron, just before we switch over. You mentioned there's a toolkit there, an optimization for wastewater that you're adapting from a previous drinking water standard. And just curious what the timeline is for that, how soon that might be available.
What we're doing right now, our timeline. So right now we finished the performance-based training pilot test, and right now we're at the very early stages of putting together an area-wide program. So it's not necessarily a toolkit per se. The training materials that I do have, that I have already created for the performance-based training, is that I have those and I can share those, no problem. But the next thing we really want to do is that we want to replicate or model a wastewater optimization program after the drinking water area-wide optimization program in the U.S. And so, so there are things available right now that we have, the training materials, and then we also have, we're working more on creating a program right now rather than a specific toolkit.